in the last. So if and when we do get a quorum, I'll just interrupt, well, depending what happens, I'll interrupt us, and we have one vote tonight, which is the meeting minutes. So just be aware that might happen as if people are added. So with that, I'm just gonna, like Chris and Matt introduce the topic. We're gonna go right, if we're on the agenda, we're gonna go right to the we're gonna skip the administrative reports, and we're gonna go right to the presentation on Act 181 and the implications for regional planning in our commission. And I know Matt has given a presentation a few months ago. I think it was actually last year to the PCC, and it was great. So I'm really glad that he's able to do it again for the full commission and for guests and members of the public. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris and Matt.
So thank you, Gabby. So yeah, Matt's going to make a presentation. He's got apparently a not great head cold. So Matt, so let's give him a little bit of grace and patience. And Matt, if for any reason you need to tap out or something, let me know. But Matt's been doing a fantastic job. He's a senior planner with us. He's our lead on municipal planning, and of course, is leading our work on updating the regional plan. But he's also been part of conversations among the regional planning commissions around topics like consistency around you're going to be hearing about all this, but consistency among the RPC is about future land use maps, right down to like what colors we should use, but also like what policy definitions were applied to the different use areas. And so really appreciate Matt stepping up and being part of the larger statewide conversations around guidance and rulemaking. So going to turn it over to Matt. Matt, like I say, do let me know if you need anything, okay?
Okay. Thank you. And thanks everyone. I'm doing okay. I'm just getting over a head cold, so I'm not 100% here this evening, but I think I'll be able to do the presentation. It is a rather complicated topic, but I'm happy to go through it. And as I'm presenting, just because I'm going to cover a fair amount of information. So if you have a question on any slide, please just jump in and ask a question rather than waiting until the end. Just again, because there's a fair amount that we'll be covering. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see. And as Gabby mentioned, I gave a very similar presentation. It's pretty much the same presentation to the Planning Coordination Committee back in October. A few minor changes since then, just as we've all been learning more about Act 181. So Act 181, as many of you may know, was passed into law in June of last year. And it made significant changes to Vermont's land use planning and regulatory framework. So that includes reforms to Act 250 and to the state designation program. So that includes designated village centers, designated downtowns, and neighborhood development areas, which we have in our region. And it creates policies that will better support those areas that are planned for growth, areas for rural and working lands, and areas for conservation. So trying to make better alignment in the state's land use and regulatory framework so that we're supporting growth and making it easier for growth to happen in the areas where we want to see it, and then making sure that we're doing a better job at conserving areas, whether those are rural or working landscapes or conservation areas where that growth may not be appropriate. So it's a major realignment in the regulatory framework. In cooperation with member towns within each RPC, the regional planning commissions and their regional plans will take on new significance in Act 250 and in the state designation program. And that's what I'll be covering this evening. There's many other changes to statute in Act 181. Some of you may know in the previous legislative session, The Home Act was passed, which created major reforms to municipal zoning bylaws when it comes to what's required for allowing for housing. And Act 181 includes some additional revisions similar to the Home Act, requiring municipalities to have certain regulations in place that will better support housing. But tonight, I'm just going to be focusing on how Act 181 is going to be impacting Wyndham Regional's work specifically. So there are four main areas where Act 181 is impacting regional planning. So it addresses our planning process in developing our regional plan, how the regional plan is adopted. It includes some new regional plan requirements. And then the big one is the new role and significance for the regional plan and maps when it comes to Act 250 and the state designation program. So to cover the first one, the regional planning process and plan requirements. So one change is there are now additional requirements and statute requiring that we incorporate meaningful citizen participation in the regional planning process. Prior to Act 181, there were requirements for doing public outreach and developing a regional plan, but the changes just kind of strengthen that public planning process requirement for the regional plan. The regional plan is required to consider potential environmental benefits and burdens on different populations in the region. So if the regional plan includes land use policies, for example, that might cause a negative environmental impact on a certain population, that needs to be considered in the development of a plan. So that could be if a industrial area, for example, with poor air quality, if that's going to have a disproportionate impact on certain populations, that would need to be considered in the regional planning process. It changes statute to give the regional plan definition of substantial regional impact in state proceedings. So this is in Act 250 applications and Section 248A applications. Our definition for what qualifies as a substantial regional impact that now has substantial deference in those state proceedings, which is just a higher level. So it's given more deference than it currently is. And then statute includes a number of purposes for the regional plan. And so to that list of existing purposes of the regional plan, Act 181 added addressing equity issues and also addressing climate resilience, mitigation, and adaptation.
Hey, Matt, I'll just clarify, and Kate, I may have missed it. Did you say what 248 relates to?
No, so
You want me to do so 248
yeah.
is energy generation and transmission, and 248A is telecom facilities. And those are through the Public Utility Commission as opposed to the Land Use Review Board.
And in terms of our planning, in terms of our adoption process, so a change in statute is there is a new board, the Land Use Review Board, which is a reformed and professionalized version of the current Natural Resources Board, the NRB. And the Land Use Review Board will now be responsible for reviewing Act 250 applications. But in addition to that, following the adoption of the regional plan by the Regional Planning Commission, the regional plan also needs to be approved by this new land use review board. And that approval will be based on the statute requirements that existed before Act 181 and the reforms with Act 181. And so we've been working with other RPCs and the Land Use Review Board to develop that kind of a plan review tool for the Land Use Review Board for when they're going to be reviewing our regional plans. And so that's been a really beneficial collaborative process in putting that draft together, because this will be an entirely new process that we're developing. There are some revised timelines and requirements for public hearings and notices and reports. I won't get into detail on that. It's nothing significant, but just, of course, things that we'll need to keep track of for future regional plan adoptions. And then Act 181 allows for interested parties that participated in the planning process to object approval by the Land Use Review Board. So, similar to a local development proposal in a municipality where an interested party that's participated in the process can appeal a decision. This gives an interested party the ability to object approval. And that would include towns. It includes 20 persons who sign a petition, who live in the region, abutting regional planning commissions, and some state agencies. Bill, did you have a question?
Yeah, very quickly. Do the revised timelines for public hearings apply just to the RPCs or to individual towns?
Just to the RPC for our regional plan.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Yeah. So now I'm going to get into some of the more substantial changes in Act 181. So for new regional plan requirements, the first one updates the natural resources and working lands regional plan element to implement Vermont conservation design. And for those that are familiar with Vermont conservation design, that is the work that's been done by the Agency of Natural Resources to map out significant forest blocks and habitat connectors across the state. And town plans are required to address to identify those forest blocks and habitat connectors and include policies for how those areas will be maintained. So these reforms just make sure that the regional plan is incorporating those implementation strategies for Vermont conservation design as well. This is something we're currently doing with our plan, so it's not a significant change. But the major change is changes to the future land use categories by creating consistent land use categories and associated requirements across every regional planning commission. And so right now we have, or before Act 181, we had 11 regional planning commissions, and each RPC developed their own future land use categories and requirements for those. And with these changes, there are now 10 land use categories shown here, which I'll, on the next few slides, go into a little more detail on these, that every RPC is required to map these 10 land use areas, and statute now defines where these areas can be located, how we go about mapping them based on different criteria. So the end result will be when you have all 11 RPCs putting together their regional land use maps, you will have effectively a statewide land use map because we're all using the same categories and using the same colors to identify those districts.
And Matt, before you go on, I'll just note, most of these land use categories, the names may look a little different, but basically we're fortunate at the Wyndham Regional Commission because these are basically the same land use categories we've historically had. So this is not a big change for us. For other regional planning commissions, this is quite a big change, not only in terms of land use categories, but also in some cases a cultural shift. Regarding like the actual kind of specific definition of where these use areas are within the respective regions. Some RPCs, as a matter of policy, actually never really particularly delineated where one use area it began and where the other ended. For us, policy-wise, culturally, this doesn't represent substantial change at all. It's more of a change in names. Was that a fair assessment, Matt?
Yeah, and it's as Chris mentioned earlier too, we were involved in the process of developing these land use categories. So I think we were able to kind of influence, along with other RPCs, influence some of these new land use categories, and so there is a fair amount of consistency with our existing districts, which I think will make the planning process for us a little more straightforward than other RPCs. So I won't go into all the criteria. Oh, Bill, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, man. I don't want to be a pain. Just a very quick question. You said that the RPCs are required to identify habitat connectors and that eventually towns will have to do that. I mean, does that mean the town plan and or the local zoning will have to have a map of habitat connectors?
So yeah, so I think it was Act 171, I want to say. It was several years ago, there was a change in statute requiring municipal plans to identify the forest blocks and habitat connectors and to include policies in their town plan on how those areas will be protected.
Okay.
And it may be, I wouldn't be surprised, Bill, if Wyndham has that in their plan already.
Yeah, I think we do. I just,
Yeah.
I don't want to tie people up. I'll follow up with you if I need to.
Okay.
Thanks.
And also the rules around what's called Tier 3, and we'll get to this in a minute. They have yet to be developed. It's going to. I forget the timeline. Matt will share it, but
Yeah.
it's nothing. It's nothing that's happening tomorrow. So there's plenty of time to figure out. We don't even right now even know what the rules are. So there's not a whole lot we can say about it.
So I won't go through all the criteria for each of these, but I just wanted to spend a little more time on these different land use districts. So RPCs can map out a downtown center or village center. So these are traditional and historic business and civic centers. In our region, Brattleboro, Bellows Falls would be downtown centers, and then we have many village centers that we have already mapped out in our regional plan. Planned growth areas. These are areas within walking distance of a center. It can be a downtown center or a village center, and the towns need to have regulations and policies with smart growth principles. Village areas are traditional or new settlement areas, generally within walking distance of a center. The idea here is these are more areas around village centers, but could be around downtown centers as well. areas that can support growth, but maybe not at the same intensity as the planned growth areas. Transition or infill areas, these are commercial linear strip developments. They're often found adjacent to planned growth areas or village areas, or they could be standalone areas. So I think you could think of, commercial development in West Brattleboro on Route 9 or along Route 100 in West Dover. Those are some examples of those transition areas.
I think, Matt, I think we had traditionally called that rural commercial, right, in our current regional plan map.
That's right. So yeah, and not every RPC had that type of land use district, but yeah, we called it rural commercial. So it's just kind of a change to the name. And
It looks like
Eric,
Eric.
Yeah, I would like to know who resolves conflicts in what parts of land are designated what particular land use. Does this all flow from the top? If the Agency of Natural Resources says this is a forest block, and then the region designates it as a forest block, and then must the municipality agree that this is a forest block or a connector or whatever? Where is there any negotiation, collaboration on what these actual areas are relative to the map?
yeah, it's a good question. So it will be a collaborative process between the RPC and each of our member towns to map out these areas. As Chris mentioned, there is a lot of consistency between our current future land use map and these new land use categories. There just are some changes to how the state is defining them. But we would be working with each town. The first step, I'll get into this, but the first step will be for Wyndham Regional to develop a draft regional land use map based on these new requirements, and then kind of create, an individualized map for each town, and then work with the town of saying, this is what we're seeing based on the statute requirements, and talk to the towns about, these are areas where you might have flexibility. These are areas there are some areas I think in statute where it's a little more rigid, and some areas where there's a little more flexibility for how these areas are mapped out. And so we would work with the towns on that. We do need to make sure that we're following the new statute requirements so that the plan can be approved by the Land Use Review Board, but the idea is for it to be a collaborative process. And we're also not, I want to make clear that our new regional land use map, we're not imposing that on towns when it comes to their own town plan maps and when it comes to their zoning. This is separate from your own planning process. Oh, Chris, I think you're muted.
I'll have this figured out eventually. Sorry. I'll just note that when a town asks us to approve their town plan, and when we historically when we do update our regional plan map, we look at what town maps are. We make sure we look for, especially when we approve town plans, we look for consistency not only with our regional plan and our regional plan future land use map, but also adjoining towns. So this shouldn't represent a radically new process. Now, when it comes to, again, these eventual tier 3 areas and what and how that will be translated into land use review board decision making, that still has yet to be determined. And again, that's going to be, I think, a couple of years, isn't it, Matt?
Yeah, I think tier three rulemaking, there's so many dates. I think it's supposed to be done by January of 2026, a year from now. Um, so additional land use categories, there's a resource-based recreation area. So these are for resort areas, including commercial and residential development. We currently have a resort area land use category in our plan. Enterprise areas are standalone industrial and commercial parks, so not part of a downtown center. Hamlets are small villages that are not eligible for that village center land use category. And then there are three rural land use categories. Rural general is low density residential, some limited commercial development. It can include farmlands and natural areas. Rural agriculture and forestry is specifically for larger blocks of farmland or forest land. So areas that are more dedicated specifically for those types of land uses. And then rural conservation is for critical natural resources areas. And we kind of have talked about this, but I just wanted to share this is our future land use map. And so not to confuse, not to be too confusing here, but for example, what we call resource, that will probably be the rural conservation district, and productive rural, those are agricultural and farmlands. Rural residential, that is general rural district. And then we have our villages and regional centers, so that would be village centers and downtown centers. We have industrial, which are the enterprise areas, rural commercial, which is the transition areas, and resort centers, which are the resource-based recreational areas. Now, it's not going to be exactly just swapping out these new names for these existing categories we have, but I think there's going to be a lot of similarities between the maps. So now I'm going to get into the Act 250 and state designation reforms and how those relate back to the regional plan. So again, please let me know if you have any questions. So for Act 2081, it makes long-term exemptions under Act 250 through the creation of this tiered system. So there's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And tier 1 is actually broken into two separate categories. There's tier 1A and tier 1B. So for an area that qualifies as tier 1A, that area within a town, so tier 1A it's meant to be, it wouldn't cover an entire municipality. It would just cover a certain area of town. So tier 1A areas are exempt from Act 250 permitting. To be eligible for tier 1A, and this is where our regional plan comes in, you would need to be mapped as either a downtown center, a village center, or a planned growth area to be eligible for tier 1A. And then there are additional requirements. So a town has to have an adopted municipal plan and confirmed planning process. They need to have zoning and subdivision bylaws. They need to have infrastructure capacity, and they need to have administrative capacity to make sure that they can handle the permitting requirements or similar permitting requirements and review process that you would see under Act 250. So for a town that's interested in eligibility for Tier 1A, they will apply through the Land Use Review Board. That application process is not available yet. That's something the Land Use Review Board will be developing this year. Jack, did you have a question?
Yeah, maybe a crazy one. Being exempt from Act 250 is one thing, but are they also exempt from all the sub permits that make up Act 250, like wastewater, like stormwater, like V-Trans highway cut permits, and I mean, there's like a dozen of them out there.
Good question. As far as I know, they are not exempt from those, that they would still need to receive all those state permits.
Quite frankly, if you need to receive all those, it's a real short walk from that to 250.
Yeah.
Which they're not really getting exempt from very much.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there are any carve-outs, but I think generally they still need to receive
Okay.
those permits. Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's tier 1A.
And Matt, I'll just note, I mean, again, feel free to tell me if you disagree, but the number of towns that we have that can probably meet that Tier 1A threshold is pretty small.
I would
Probably
agree.
one town.
Yeah, I think it's probably one town.
Probably just Brattleboro for now.
Yeah.
Not that others can't aspire to it and build that capacity, but that's right now it's probably just Brattleboro.
Yeah, and because it's just downtown center and planned growth areas, it's really just the core area of Brattleboro 2. That could be Tier 1A. Tier 1B also creates an exemption from Act 250, but it's only for housing projects of 50 or fewer units on 10 acres or less. And the requirements are a little less stringent than Tier 1A. So you still need to have a municipal plans, zoning and subdivision bylaws, but you can have water or wastewater infrastructure or adequate soils to support on-site septic, but you still need that administrative capacity as well. Tier 1B can be, again, a downtown or village center, planned growth area, or that village area as well. Now, the process for getting Tier 1B status is a little different than Tier 1A. So Tier 1B is approved once the Land Use Review Board approves the regional plan. So towns would request that WRC map an area as Tier 1B. So WRC would not map or not designate an area as Tier 1B unless a town wants that. And we would work with towns to make sure that they are meeting the requirements for that Tier 1B eligibility. Tier 2, these are areas that are not designated as Tier 1 or Tier 3. So generally, there's no changes from the current Act 250 jurisdiction and permitting requirements. It's just kind of status quo for Tier 2. And then Tier 3, these are critical natural resources areas that are still to be defined by the Land Use Review Board. Statute lists some examples of natural resource areas, but the Land Use Review Board will need to define that. This is going to be an overlay district on our regional future land use map, and there will likely be significant overlap with the rural conservation district, but it's not entirely the same area. And the Land Use Review Board also needs to develop rules for Tier 3 projects as well. So that's an area where more work will be done. Are there any questions on the Act 250 reforms? If not, I'll go on to the changes to the state designation program. So these reforms were put in place to make it easier for municipalities to receive state designation for those historic centers in neighborhoods immediately around them. And it reduces the number of state designated areas. So as many of you are familiar with designated downtowns and village centers, with these reforms, there will just be a center designation. So that will include all existing downtowns and village centers. So if a municipality has an existing designated downtown or a village center, that will just automatically become a center under the new program. So there's nothing a town needs to do for that transition to happen. Under the new center designation, the state has developed 3 steps, steps 1, 2, and 3. And as you proceed up those steps, the town and property owners are eligible for additional benefits under the designation program. So for step 1, a town just needs to have a downtown or village center mapped on the future land use map. So that would be a town working with Wyndham Regional, if they don't already have it mapped, for us to map out village center or downtown center in their community, and then that automatically becomes a center with the approval of our regional plan.
And because most of you ask us to map those for you for your town plans, we already have those areas mapped, right, Matt?
Yeah, so we have those areas mapped, and the state, the state has that data, and they will just automatically transition all those areas over. And so if you are a town that doesn't have that designation, and we've already mapped a village center, then you will just automatically get this designation with these reforms. But we'll be working with the towns because there may be additional properties that a town would want to see included in that village center, so we can make sure that gets taken care of. For step 2, a town needs to have a confirmed planning process. So for step 1, a town doesn't need to have a town plan even to meet that step 1 requirements. But step 2, you need to have an adopted plan and a confirmed planning process. And the center needs to include areas that are listed in the National Register of Historic Places. And then step 3, you need to have a downtown improvement plan, investment agreement, capital plan, public water and wastewater, permanent zoning and subdivision, historic preservation regulations, and design standards. So quite a bit more required for step 3. And then, so with these reforms, there are just 2 designations. And so the second designation is neighborhoods. So that includes all existing neighborhood development areas, which we have in Brattleboro and Putney. And I think that's it currently for our region. so those would become neighborhoods, and then areas that we map as planned growth areas or village areas on the future land use map would also become neighborhoods under this new designation. So just to kind of tie it back together, try to tie it all together. So with our regional land use map, again, so a downtown or a village center, those automatically become state designated centers, and they are eligible for Act 250 Tier 1A and Tier 1B jurisdiction. Again, a village center is only eligible for Tier 1B. Planned growth areas become state designated neighborhoods. They are eligible for Tier 1A and Tier 1B. And just to step back, village centers are eligible for Tier 1A. It's village areas that are not. And so for village areas, those become state designated neighborhoods. They're eligible for 1B jurisdiction, but not Tier 1A. And so our regional land use map is going to have the most significance when it comes to Act 250 jurisdiction and the state designation program in these land use categories. And the other land use categories, while they are still important, have less influence when it comes to Act 250 jurisdiction, and there's no factor when it comes to the state designation. Kathy, did you have a question?
I did. So, if you, like Matt, I don't know, I don't think Wyndham, because for instance, when we were analyzed about being a designated village center, so there was a whole process through that, and then now I understand that's gone away. But if you haven't done all this, what do you suggest would be the best first step to start to work towards where you have to end up?
Yeah, so I think if Wyndham was interested in having this new center designation for a village in Wyndham, I think in this process where we're going to be working with the towns, we would want to make sure that the area identified as a village center in Wyndham meets all the new statute criteria. But if it does, then we would just map that as a village center on our future land use map. And once approved by the Land Use Review Board, then Wyndham would have that center designation.
The challenge for Wyndham is going to be the criteria, because really you've got more what looks like a hamlet than a village.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have some linear issues too that I know was it Richard Amore?
Hmm.
Anyway, I don't mean to take up that time now. I was just trying to figure out if we don't think we meet certain requirement, then we'll just be working with you all to figure it out. And thank you for that.
Yeah, and part of that process of meeting with towns too will be pointing out, if a town doesn't meet a requirement for these land use categories or for Act 250 exemption or for the new designations, to point out, these are the steps you would need to take to be eligible, and then it's up to the town, of course, if they want to pursue any of that. But just to make it clear to the towns, you're not quite there yet, and these are the steps you need to take to get there.
And it's not dissimilar from what we would do right now if you asked for village center designation. So it's not,
Right.
again, nothing has radically changed.
Um, so one, oh, Bill, did you have a
Yeah, very quick.
question?
I don't want to make this Wyndham focused, but if a town does not have town sewer or water, what's the likelihood of becoming a village center, realistically in terms of, the tier 1B, 50 or fewer units on 10 acres or less. But if you don't have any town sewer or water, that's pretty difficult to do, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, and I seem to remember the criteria for the village center um it's definitely less stringent than the criteria for the downtown center.
Yeah.
I
You have to
think
map
for
we'd have to map your soil, see if you've got soil
yeah,
capacity to handle
Yeah.
distributed wastewater systems to support housing at some level of density.
yeah.
Okay.
I think it would be difficult for Wyndham.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Yeah. Um so I have one more slide just about Act 181, and then I was going to talk for a few minutes just about our schedule for meeting these new requirements. But I wanted to mention one part of this too is how regional planning commissions are required to um, take housing targets developed by the state and allocate housing units for each municipality. Um, so the Department of Housing and Community Development, uh, every 5 years, they do a housing needs assessment report for the state. Um, and with some recent legislation, one of the requirements, one new requirement was for DHCD to um, allocate housing units for each region. So these were just announced on January 20th. So just a few days ago. So for the Wyndham region, they have a lower and upper range for housing targets that are needed. And so for the upcoming 5 years until 2030, it's saying a range of about 2,500 to 3,700 housing units are needed in the Wyndham region. And then they have a longer range out to 2050, and this is about 8,000 to 15,600 units are needed for the region. So RPCs are developing, and each RPC is taking different approach to the methodology, but we will be developing a methodology for allocating those housing targets for each town within the region. Um, once, and we need to include that in our regional plan. And then once we've done that, town plans will need to include that housing target. And so as we're working with towns on these Act 181 changes and changes to the regional future land use map, we're also going to be working with towns on those housing target numbers. Now, there is significant difference across the region in terms of infrastructure capacity to support that number of housing units. So, as we know, there are some towns that have municipal water and wastewater and other infrastructure to support more housing units than other towns. So that's going to be a big factor as we develop a methodology, as realistically where can housing go in our region.
And Matt, let me just add, and so th- our ability, so in this discussion about housing targets and where these housing allocations, um, I'm a big fan of reality-based planning. And so where you actually have wastewater capacity and water capacity, to my mind, is important in this. We'll be developing our methodology, but to my mind, part of the methodology may just say, these targets are nice and they're useful in letting us know, like, in order to meet the need for the current generation of Vermonters and future Vermonters, this is what, an analysis says we're going to need. And so, to my mind, the value of this actually communicates for the region as a whole, beyond from a town by town by town basis, what the actual need is and what it will be. And these are actually fairly conservative estimates. But I think we also then need to say the reality is the existing infrastructure capacity to support this is X, and the rest of this is purely hypothetical. And another point that I'd make is that nothing in in statute has changed that could actually make us compel any of this to happen whatsoever. So this is kind of like saying, hey, to retire and live well, here's our target, and this is what you should have by this year, and this is what you should have by that year. It's not at all connected to your ability to earn, right? Or your ability to earn interest. So this is, to my mind, a bit of an exercise that the legislature said would be a nice thing to do. I think the real value here is seeing these aggregate targets and getting us to think about the sheer number of units that are needed. So I'm a little concerned that people will get frightened by these targets and feel like, oh my God, we're suddenly imposing X number of units in a town. We can't do that. We don't do that. And the reality is still the towns are utterly in control of this, especially depending on what infrastructure you feel like you want to invest in to make housing possible. So just wanted to put that ginormous caveat out there. And Matt, if you disagree or anything, let me know.
No, I agree 100%.
Thanks. And I see Kathy and Eric have their hands up. I just want to do a time check because I'm going to be respectful of sort of what we told people how long we keeping them. So Kathy, then Eric.
I have a quick question. Could there be a road map for micro housing units where you're doing 3 units? Or 4 units, and you can take that in a septic, because let's face it, Wyndham, does not have the whole world runs here on very low density parcels, everybody with their own septic. But I think we could be clever if we got a roadmap for, looking at micro units. And so I hope that'll be part of what you'll be talking about.
Okay. That's a good idea. Thanks, Kathy. Sure, Matt will bring that back. Eric?
Quick comment that regardless of existing water and sewer infrastructure, we should not be advocating housing that will be located in floodable or flood erosion zones, regardless in the towns. We need to put new housing where it's flood proof.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I forgot to mention that. Because one of the things I've been working on, y'all have heard me talk about this before, is working with UVM on mapping where all the wastewater systems exist. And this is the other piece of the puzzle, right? Is just because you have wastewater capacity doesn't mean you actually have the capacity in the places where the housing would actually be suitable for any number of reasons. One of the things and somebody asked at the last full commission meeting what my planning priority is for the region, and it's exactly that. As we think about where these growth areas should be, is working with towns to think about how do we grow up and away from flood areas. Whereas I'm going to go back quickly to, so I'm working with UVM on mapping where these wastewater systems are in the state. Once you overlay that with the zoning atlas to show what municipal zoning says about development, how that relates to wastewater, and then once you overlay that with flood hazard risks, I think the story it's going to tell for Vermont is going to be utterly horrifying. But hopefully that will instruct us towards more productive policy about what we actually need to invest in to grow a more resilient Vermont, telling that bigger story. So that'll happen over the next year or so. But that's my priority for the commission, is working with towns to think about how do we create more flood resilient communities.
James?
Yeah, Chris or Matt, just a quick question since Newfane is starting the process of writing a new town plan. What's your estimated timeline for developing this methodology for allocating housing targets?
Yeah. Well, let's see. If I can, I can actually get into that on the next few slides, and I think I might be able to answer that question. But James, if not, then we can definitely I can respond to that after the next couple of slides. Because I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of our process for addressing these One Act 81 changes. So as commissioners know, we are getting close to finalizing the current regional plan update that we've been working on the last couple of years. And we're going to be holding public meetings in February and then making final revisions before holding public hearings and considering adoption later this spring, early summer. So we wanted to finish this current regional plan update process before getting into the Act 181 amendments, just so we're not overcomplicating things for our towns. So that we can finish the regional plan update process during the upcoming months, so winter into summer of this year, we're going to be doing a lot of just internal planning and coordination. So later in the spring, I'm going to offer some webinars about Act 181 that are more geared towards municipalities. So this has been very geared towards the Regional Planning Commission, but kind of reformatting this presentation so it's specifically for towns to give an introduction to Act 181. We'll be developing that first draft of the new future land use map. And then also developing the process, James, for assigning housing targets for each town. So that'll be over the next few months, and then creating general and town specific informational materials. And then the idea would be next fall is to send that information to each town. So sending each town an overview of the Act 181 reforms, the draft regional future land use map, and the draft housing allocations, and then offering to meet with select boards, planning commissions, town staff as requested to review those materials. And I think each town will want to engage with it differently. And then, so following that, we would get feedback from towns and then make additional updates to the map and the housing allocations, and then share a final draft of the map and housing allocations with each town. So this would be, winter of next year, hold additional meetings as needed. And then we would go into preparing the regional plan amendment for approval. So we'll need to make some edits to the text of the plan, incorporate the future land use map and housing allocations. And then again, we'll go through that process of submitting it to the full commission for approval and then submitting it to the land use review board. We have until December 31st of 2026 to meet these requirements. But our goal is by fall of 2026 to complete it. Does that answer your question, James? So I think it'll work well with Newfane. I know because I just met with Newfane last week. I think it'll work well with your schedule for town plan update. So that's all I had. I know it's a lot of information. to
No,
go
that was
over.
great. Thank you. I appreciate that, Matt. Thank you. And we will circulate his slides so that you can, take another look, and if you have additional questions or thoughts, you can always comment later. It was there's a lot of information, a lot of changes to take in. So thanks for making it comprehensive and give us bite-sized pieces, Matt.
And Gabby, we'll go ahead and get the video posted as opposed to waiting for the draft minutes to be approved. We'll go ahead and get the video of this posted up too.
Sounds good. And the slides will be available online as well. Perfect. Thank you both. And then as far as the remainder of our sort of non-meeting, since we didn't make a quorum, and I know we're starting to lose people, so the project review committee reports are available at the links. Jack, do you have any big
It's-
ticket items?
It's been very, very quiet. Out on the forecast, there is a large solar array planned, or at least discussed being planned for the Vernon area, a little over 4 megawatts, I believe. Stratton is just beginning their every 10-year update of their master plan, and Mount Snow is still sitting out there with no master plan and nobody working on one. So God only knows where that'll go. But other than that, it's been very quiet.
All right, thanks for the update, Jack. Moving on to the executive director's report, Chris.
Matt, if you want to go, unless you want to hear what I'm about to, we've been talking about it all day. If you want to hear about the OMB directives, you're welcome to go.
Yeah, I may sign off.
Okay.
Nice to see everyone. Thank you for your patience with this cold.
You did great. Thank you,
yeah,
Matt.
yeah.
Thank you, Matt. And I think while we were on the call, the judge justice, let's talk about the OMB order, just ruled on it. So
Yeah.
ever changing.
So I'm just gonna just hit the high point on this. I am not going to get into the politics. But so we're basically last night an order was issued that basically said all payments on all federal grants would be suspended. So all of us have been, by all of us, I mean like the entire universe of federal grantees have been responding to this, or anybody who receives funding indirectly from the federal government has been responding to this. There's been a lot of back and forth today, but the initial directive, and I'm going to read this to you just because I've been in public service all of my professional life, and this was new to me and trying to figure out how to apply it to our actual operations. Again, not getting into the politics of it. It says financial assistance. This is a directive from the Office of Management and Budget telling all the agency heads to basically review all federal grant programs. It says financial assistance should be dedicated to advancing administration priorities, focusing taxpayer dollars to advance a stronger and safer America, and eliminating the financial burden of inflation for citizens, unleashing American energy and manufacturing, ending wokeness and the weaponization of government, promoting efficiency in government, and making America healthy again. The use of federal resources to advance Marxist equity, transgenderism, and Green New Deal social engineering policies is a waste of taxpayer dollars that does not improve day-to-day lives of those we serve. So from an operational perspective, I don't know what the federal definition is of Marxist equity, transgenderism, Green New Deal, social engineering policies. So it's hard to think through as far as like operationalizing that. So understanding what of our transportation money that we receive, that the state receives, how does that comport with this? Our brownfields funding, our hazard mitigation grant funding, climate adaptation resilience type funding, I don't know. So, and all of us are trying to make sense of this. But again, all of us, this is like, I would say even into the federal agencies, trying to understand what it all means. So what happens is there's just a lot of uncertainty right now. And so the direction to staff has been, we need to invoice early and often so that we can take advantage of payment windows whenever they open, so that we can help manage our cash flow. As far as actually suspending some of our work, I've directed Sue West, our associate director who leads our brownfields work, to suspend our work on the work that is directly funded by EPA, for which we do outlays and they reimburse us, because those could be substantial outlays and we have to be able to, pay the contractors. And so we've already informed the engineering firms, and they responded back to us today that they understand we're not the only client who's reaching out on this. As far as other state work, we're reaching out to state agencies to see what their direction is to us for contracts that we have with them. For instance, I'm the lead on emergency planning, so I reached out to Vermont Emergency Management about what this means for our emergency management planning grant and the work we do under the hazard mitigation grant program. And the director there says, good question. For now, they're proceeding as normal. But there was another directive that came out of the Office of Management and Budget today saying, no, we are already moving forward for things that don't meet these other criteria. We're going to treat them normally, but there's still a lot of vagueness there. So they're going to work that through. And as Gabby just said, now that a court has it was an injunction, Gabby? I'm trying to remember the legal term.
I assume so. They just they put a freeze on Trump's executive order. So
I think there's some question as to whether or not, and again, I'm not being political. This is literally a question that's being asked: is will this administration abide by court rulings? So my responsibility is to protect our, make sure that we're going to remain operational. So our cash reserves right now are good. We've been kind of anticipating we didn't know if it might be a government shutdown or other things. So we're all caught up on invoicing. We're in as good a shape as we can possibly be heading into this uncertainty. And now, frankly, we just have to wait. And some towns have reached out to me. I don't know what this means for grants that you have either directly with the federal government or through the state. And so we're just all going to have to wait and let this all kind of get interpreted and applied through the various agencies that we work with. So again, I think we're on solid footing, financial footing, fiscal footing as we're able to be in the circumstance. And I think we're just going to have to be able to respond accordingly. The grant that we have, it's a new one that we haven't really even begun yet, called the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. That's through the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency through the new Vermont Climate Action Office. The funding originates with the EPA. I suspect that is the kind of funding that might get clawed back and go away. But otherwise, I'm hoping that, like our emergency management planning grant work, our hazard mitigation work, transportation, all of that will just continue to proceed as usual. We'll see. It's just kind of hard to nail anything down right now. So any questions for me on this? All right. And that's it, Gabby. It's just over to you.
Oh, yeah. So I think that just the two things I'll quickly mention is our change of schedule for our full commission meetings. It was discussed at the executive committee 2 weeks ago. And we were couldn't remember last month, what month we were in. But we're going to sort of front load our full commission meetings because we end up sort of getting caught up at the end of the year with holidays. So we will have a full commission meeting. Obviously January is today. We'll have one in February that will be extra, and then we'll have our regular one in March. So we'll make sure to make a bigger announcement, but that we will have full commission meetings for the first 3 months of this year.
And that'll give us more flexibility. Oftentimes we're kind of trying to, by statute, we're supposed to have 6 a year. And per our bylaws, we're supposed to have 6 a year. And sometimes we kind of, like this year, we kind of run into the back end of the year, trying to fit those in. So we're trying to front load. The February discussion will be a review of our four-town housing charrette that we did. I think it'll be a really interesting presentation from faculty at UMass Amherst. And we're looking at replicating that this year, looking at flood adaptation resilience.
And then the only other thing I wanted to mention is that the other thing that the executive committee had a discussion about this month was taking a closer look at our committee structure and maybe doing some reorganization to streamline it, to make it sort of less onerous time-wise for our commissioners, to make it more resilient moving forward. Our committee structure it was developed sort of on a historical basis, and it never really changed for decades. So we are taking a closer look at that and how we might reimagine the committee structure moving forward. So that's a discussion that's ongoing, but I wanted to just give the full commission a heads up on that one.
And one other thing that we discussed was, sorry, Gabby, I hope you don't mind my jumping in, is when we have inclement weather, as you saw at the top of the agenda this time around, as long as we're not discussing making financial decisions, proceeding with the meeting, but not having the physical location available. That way I'm not trying to get here in a blizzard or an ice storm to sit here by myself in the office and we don't have to suspend the meeting unnecessarily and try to figure out how to make it work with your schedule. So that the exec board agreed to proceed with, if we're not making a financial decision, to proceed with those meetings. We'll duly note that the physical location won't be available, but the remote meeting will be conducted.
Any questions about those three items? All right, hearing and seeing none. I mean, we don't really have a meeting, but if anyone from the public wants to have a public comment, now's the time. All right, hearing and seeing none, we don't have to adjourn. But thank you all for being here, and we'll see each other next month in February for that added meeting. Thank you
Thanks,
all. Have a good
everybody.
evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.